So we are recording. Hi, this is Halton here, and welcome to the National Fireman's Journal. This is my good friend Frank Viscuso. Hey, listen, if you enjoy the show today, please click on the subscribe button. We'd love to have you follow us. We're trying to get some good information out there from the folks in the fire service who make a difference. And if you're interested in being on the show, give me a call. We'll see if we can't get you in here sometime. So, hey, Frank and I were visiting yesterday, as a matter of fact, about all things teams and leadership and and Frank has really spent a lifetime looking at that. He's written two great books, Common Valor, which is an amazing collection of stories of firefighters who stepped up and under really tough circumstances and why they did it and how they did it. And it's a great book. And then he followed that up with Step Up and Lead, which is a classic and a video series and amazing training. And Frank is also going to be keynoting in 2021. Was supposed to be 2020, but Frank asked us to postpone. He said he wasn't feeling well or something. So we canceled the whole show. So the whole COVID, Wuhan, Corona, whatever. This is the only virus I know that has 11 names. So anyway, whatever this thing is, we had to push that. We had to push it back because of this deadly outbreak. And so there we are, right? So Frank will be keynoting in 2021. So we hope to see you in April in 2021 when Frank takes the stage. But in the meantime, Frank, welcome to the National Fireman's Journal.
I'm thinking, thank you, Bobby. I'm thinking that would probably make me the first two-time keynoter, right? 2 years in a row. At least it was announced.
You're killing me.
I'm trying to find humor.
Well, that's that's the only way to get through stuff like this, right? The silver lining. Silver lining.
Yes. It's funny because you have good and bad days, and everybody does. This whole thing that's going on right now in the country, we're directly connected to it here in New Jersey because I have some good friend, very, very good friend of mine who's been in a hospital, in and out of consciousness for more than a month, dealing with this. He's a police officer. I have family members, not direct family members, but people that are connected to my wife and I that have tested positive. Some have very minor symptoms. Some are like my friend I just talked about. And so we have good and bad days, and my wife was having a not so good day just a moment ago. And I just told her, focus on something that you can control, because we can't control that. And, but we can control how we feel about it and how we think about it and what we can do. And that's all you can, man, and I think that what I appreciate the most about this industry that we're in is that we're surrounded by people that is what they do. They're problem solvers. They look for what they can do to make things better, and they focus on that. But it doesn't come, I guess, without a price, because sometimes that those things just kind of accumulate. And I liken it to like CO. You got a CO alarm. You can have a large introduction to CO. It sets the alarm off for a little bit over a long period of time, and that'll set it off too. And that's kind of like stress, right? So we deal with stuff, and then all of a sudden, maybe and this happened to me before. I'm driving down the road, and all of a sudden, wait, something doesn't feel right. I don't feel right. And I remember calling my wife saying, I'm just going to get checked out because something just doesn't feel right. And what it turned out to be was the accumulation of stress that I just kind of bottled up, didn't deal with the right way, or maybe I did deal with it the right way, but I just had eventually reached that point where I'm like, all right, now it's just gotten the better of me. So we all get there. I just want to encourage people to focus on what you can do and not what's happening around us that we don't have control over.
Well, that's why I think the Serenity Prayer is so popular. Even if you're not Friends of Bill, which is the AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, that Serenity Prayer, God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And sometimes there's just things you got to live with. You may not like it, but you live with it, and you adapt and adjust and you overcome. Or if you can extract yourself from that situation, you extract yourself. But there are just some things you can't change, right? I mean, you can't turn back the hands of time. I know you can live a life of regret, but like another famous New Jersey fellow, a Newark guy, I believe, his old man was Frank Sinatra's old man was a Newark firefighter. Did you know that?
I did hear that, and
that's a true story. His old man was on the job in Newark, New Jersey.
Yeah, that is pretty awesome. That is pretty awesome. And it's funny when you go through Hoboken. Now, Hoboken, talk about an underrated place. In Manhattan, you get
Maybe
this.
maybe it is Hoboken. It's either Hoboken or Newark.
It's Hoboken. Yeah, he was born in Hoboken, New Jersey. I don't know where his father was a firefighter, but he was born in
I
maybe
think
Hoboken.
I stand corrected. I believe it's Hoboken.
Yeah, but Hoboken's also the birthplace of baseball. A lot of people don't know that. And
No way.
people don't realize this, but I'm a
Abner
huge baseball
Doubleday?
fan. What's that?
Abner Doubleday?
Abner Doubleday.
Well, that's Mr. Baseball.
Yeah, well, I don't know if he's the one that invented it, or maybe it's just a bunch of kids that just went out on a sand lot and say, I don't know what this thing is, but let's just throw it around and find out what happens.
I was just talking to my buddy Jim Lawrence yesterday, the day before yesterday, a famous Yankee ball player. He won 2 World Series, 96 and 97 back to back. He was the guy who hit those 3-run dingers. And there you go. So
I know the name well.
The King. You know who I'm
Yeah.
talking about. What a great guy. What a great
So
guy.
he's a good friend of yours?
His buddy of mine, yeah.
All right, so I'm going to ask you for a favor after this, and I'll talk to you after this. But
Okay.
see, I don't know if you know this. See, I serve on the board of directors for the Toms River East Little League.
Oh,
And Toms River East, where I live, they're kind of powerhouses in that whole little league. They won the World Series about 20 years ago. They're always pretty competitive. But baseball's a passion in my family. My kids play. You can probably see some of the artifacts I have back here. But my kids play, and they do travel ball and rec ball, and I coach. I've coached, I think, 22 teams since they started playing, at various different levels, and I love it. I love the sport.
Okay, I'll give you one famous quote, and if you can tell me who it was, then you're a total baseball fanatic.
Well, hold on, then I'm just going to tell you right now that it had to be Yogi Berra.
Nope.
Okay.
It was after a great hit. It was after a great hit, which just stunned everybody. And the guy, it's one of those after the game interviews, and it was a big game. It was a series game. And they said, wow, that was, it's amazing that you chose that pitch. And he said, I was looking for a high outside fastball. I got a high outside fastball. I felt I was very fortunate. Now, who looks for the high outside fastball?
That's pretty awesome. I don't know who said the quote, but I like that.
Roberto Clemente.
Clemente. It's funny because so I'm traveling. I was out in St. Louis, right? And I met with Jimmy Silver. Now we have dinner on the hill, the Italian restaurants.
Right, yeah.
And he says to me, Yogi Berra grew up, 1 block over.
Whoa.
Yeah, and I said, you're kidding me? He goes, yeah, there's a plaque there on the street that was dedicated to him. I said, I'd love to see that. So he brings me over there, and we're looking at the plaque. And as we're looking at the plaque, a woman's walking by with a dog, and she says, can I help you? And Jimmy says, yeah, are you Yogi's niece? Which I'm thinking, well, you know her? And she goes, I am actually. But he knew that Yogi's niece actually lived in the house. He says, yeah, I'm sorry to bother you. This is my buddy Frank. He's a Yankee fan. He came in from New Jersey. I just wanted to show him where Yogi grew up. She says, oh, great. Come on in. I'm thinking, here I go. So here we are sitting on a porch with Yogi Berra's niece, of her telling us stories of what it was like having him as an uncle, and what a great moment that was. Ironically, that's the night that somebody actually broke into his museum here in New Jersey and stole some of his stuff out of the museum, which was terrible. But at least I had an alibi.
His boy has written some great stuff about his dad, and he says his dad got credited with a lot of things he never said, but his dad said, it was a quote actually that his dad took from Horace Greeley. And Horace Greeley once said, when the man becomes the legend, print the legend.
Yeah.
And my favorite line from Yogi was, he said, in theory, they tell me this should work in practice. In practice, it doesn't.
That's great. That's great. Yeah. Yeah, I've heard that. I've heard he didn't say a lot of the things he was
credited for. Yeah. Like Mark Twain. People are kind of saying it was Twain. No, it wasn't. If you look back, it was somebody else. But Twain is always the fall guy, which I think is when we talk about leadership in teams, Bruno was much that way. He was a great leader, and oftentimes he would throw something out there. And I read all kinds of books about Brunoisms, and I was there when it was said, because we were friends for a long, long time, and I'm like, it wasn't Bruno. Bruno used it, but it wasn't Bruno's. But just like Horace Greeley said, when the man becomes the legend, print the legend. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Who cares where it came from? You know, sometimes it's just the delivery of it, right? And
Yeah.
Kennedy was really good as a leader in taking biblical passages or quotes from other people. He once took a famous Douglas MacArthur quote and he turned it into, "Ask not what your country can do for you," but it was actually a kind of a modification of something MacArthur had said years ago about the country now needs men in these times more than ever, and so so anyway, Kennedy just kind of had a much more prosaic approach, and as a leader, he recognized that if you can turn the words correctly, right, that'll resonate more with people. And he also said a really important thing I think all leaders should remember, and we're going to be talking about leadership, but Kennedy once said, if you want to be quotable, quote.
Yeah. Simple, right? And it's funny because you mentioned biblical principles, and I had read somewhere that How to Win Friends and Influence People, which is just a tremendous book. But when it was originally written, Carnegie was using stories out of the Bible, and apparently it just wasn't. This is again what I read. It wasn't connecting, at least with his publishers or with people. So he had changed them to real stories that still illustrated the stories and the points that came from the Bible. And man, that's a great book. Have you read it? I'm sure you have. You've read everything.
Yeah, How to Win Friends and Influence People. I still think it's one of the best books that you can read,
Yep.
period. Irrespective if you're a firefighter or you want to be a leader or a company officer, whatever it is. It's just a great book. I think one of the things that Carnegie has in there that he repeats several times is there's no sound sweeter to someone than their own name.
Yes.
The sound of their name. When you hear Frank Viscuso, that's music to your ears. You know what I mean? People love that. And I don't think it means that people are narcissistic or it just means that you're acknowledging who they really are.
You're paying attention to them. I have a friend who you would tell me that, imagine everyone you come in contact with has a sign around them that says, make me feel important. And one of the best things you could do is by acknowledging, them by their name and who they are.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I hate it because I'm old. And so my memory's going and I meet a few people every year and in my travels. And as I've aged, my memory's been affected. At moments I feel like Joe Biden. What day is it? I'm just teasing Mr. Biden. Take the offense if you're watching right now.
Half of the people just clicked off. The other half just turned up the volume.
I'll give you another good quote. Thomas Jefferson once said it: "A man's politics, religion, or ideology is no reason for me not to be his friend." And
Yes.
I have nothing but the utmost respect for Mr. Biden as a human being and as a person. I don't agree with a lot of his politics, but I think he's a wonderful human being, and I wish him nothing but the best. But we're in the same age group, and so it's not uncommon. I'll meet somebody, and man, I'm looking at the face, and I'm like, I know this guy.
Yeah.
You're looking for that name, And I think one of the things as a leader to help us is don't be embarrassed by it. I lately at my age, I say, you know what? Gosh, I know you. Your name's slipping me. And people will forgive you that. You know what I mean? What they won't forgive you is doing the, hey, buckaroo, bro. It's like,
what's up, buddy?
What's up, buddy? Yeah.
No, listen, that happens to me. I'm walking. I was on duty. I'm walking out of the town hall one day. I just picked up some stuff to bring to the station. And as I'm walking out, a guy's walking in. Frank, how are you? And I have this 3-4 minute conversation. And I'm thinking, I have no idea who it is I'm talking to. It turns out, and I did just what you said. It turns out that because I said, I'm sorry, but I just can't put the face. And it was a kid I went to high school with. But I remember thinking, he looks 20 years older than me. But then I called my wife and I said, let me just ask you a question. How old do I look? She says, why are you asking? I said, because I just ran into a kid from high school. He looks so much older than I think I look. Then I'm thinking, maybe I'm doing really good, or maybe I really look old and I don't know I look old. But he recognized me. I didn't recognize him. So maybe that's telling me something.
Oh, that's so funny. Yeah. I mean, aging is an interesting part of leadership. I think that, as we talk about this, I think that I'm a huge fan of ancient wisdom. I think that, I think the presentism, it's called presentism or the right now is interesting, but it's not really wisdom or knowledge until it's stood the test of time, right? And so I think much of what we're seeing now, with the folks who follow Lyotard and Derrida and Foucault, the French postmodernists, and what people would commonly call the woke philosophers. If there are no fundamental truths, no right and wrong, what do you base any of your moral or ethical decisions on? And if you're going to lead, how does that, if there is nothing to gauge something's truthfulness by, and that's what postmodernism is predicated on, that everyone's reality is what it is, and if it's real for them, if you want to identify as a zebra from the Pacific Island with a lisp, you can do that, and good for you, and that's who you are. No, you're Frank from Falls River. Even if you want to pretend you're a zebra from the Pacific Islands, you're not. You know what I mean? And so if you don't have that objective reality and some standard by which you determine good or bad or right or wrong or good and evil, that's a problem. And so I think we're seeing some of that in today's leadership, right? In other words, if everything is okay, whoa, and everything's not okay. And
everything is not okay. And trust me, there's plenty of people that will tell you what you're doing is not okay, even when you're doing the right thing. So, I mean, there is right and there is wrong. And we need to know the difference. Everybody know what's legal, moral, and ethical. You have to know. But think about this. Here we are in a fire service. How many times have you seen people post things, say things, teach things, put up a slide, DTRT, right? DTRT, do the right thing, do the right thing, do the right thing. But then they go out and do something that's clearly not the right thing.
And I'm as guilty of that as anybody else. I mean, I think
all of us.
If there were gold medals in hypocrisy, I'd be in the Olympics. I was telling you this yesterday, just the other day. I got angry at a guy. We all have a lot of things going on in our lives, and just a lot of stuff in my world oddly came together in the last few days in a really difficult way, right? And someone said something to me about something else, and I lit off on this guy who had nothing to do with any of it, for no reason other than I needed to vent, right? I needed to let it go. And so when we set standards, I think one of the things we often ought to point out is that we don't expect anybody to live up to them. In other words, I think the nice thing about, if you read Winthrop, and he talked about the shining city on the hill, right? And when Reverend Winthrop was originally one of the folks prior to our original founding fathers, and by saying that, he knew it was unattainable. But if we don't attempt the unattainable, then life is almost meaningless, right?
Yeah. Let me ask you a question now, because this is something that I think is really.
I'm interviewing you. I'm just kidding.
Well, no, but this is good, because you're talking about this scenario where you went off on a guy. Did you go back and say, "Hey, I'm sorry, I didn't mean that," or is this just an afterthought?
No, I called him. He wasn't there when I went off on him. I went off on him and to other people.
Okay.
Which is worse.
Yeah.
And so, hey, you show me somebody who's perfect, and they got a couple of pieces of wood they put them on. Yeah. So keep that in mind.
Well,
I've read the Bible. I have no Jesus complex because I read the ending.
Yeah. Good point. So I went to work one day, and one of my captains comes up to me and he says, "Chief, I made a mistake in my office. I made a mistake the other day." I said, "What happened?" He said, "We had a fire," and I was off duty. He said, "We had a firefighter that was working from another shift, had been working with us for a day. He had about 2 years on the job." He says, "We're sitting around the kitchen table with our whole crew and this firefighter, and we're doing a drill on the radio. So everybody's got a radio in their hand. We're going over the features and everything." And he says, the firefighter says, "So if I'm on channel 2 talk around and I key the mic, does it go to dispatch, a transmission?" And he says, he's telling me the story. He goes, "I looked at him, and then I looked at one of our younger firefighters that's been on a couple months and said, answer that for him." So the firefighter answers the question. "Yes, it goes to dispatch." He turns back to the firefighter and says, "He's been on here for 2 months. You've been on here for 2 years. How come he knows the answer and you don't?" Now, because he came to me and he's explaining to me, and he starts us off saying, I made a mistake. I go, okay. And then what happened? He goes, well, as soon as I did it, I realized that I shouldn't have done it. I go, why do you think you shouldn't have done it? He goes, well, because I doubt he'll ever want to ask me a question again. I said, yeah, but it goes a little deeper than that. Think about this. He actually comes from another group where the captain is not as aggressive as you are at really challenging your members and preparing your members. I mean, he's a great officer for training his members. And you hold your people to a high standard. He comes from another environment. He sits here and thinks, well, this is pretty cool. They're doing a drill. I can learn something. And he asks the question. And yeah, it's very unlikely not only that for him to ask a question to you, but for him to ask a question to anybody getting that kind of treatment. He goes, yeah, I realize that. He goes, I told him later that I'm sorry. I said, well, good. Because that's the first step. Yeah. But what I took away from that was the self-awareness that he now knew that his words mattered, because you're always influencing people. And a lot of people don't realize this. Your actions, your gestures, the things you say, the things you don't say, it influences people. So, I mean, you can either use that to your advantage or not. But anytime the attention's on you, you're sitting at the kitchen table at the fire station, you're having a conversation, the things you say matter more than you know, because you're actually creating this impression of who you are, what you believe in, what you stand for. And you can't just turn it on and turn it off and say, you know what, today I'm going to come to work, I'm going to have morals, I'm going to have standards, I'm going to try to do the right thing, I'm going to treat people right. Tomorrow, I'll decide when that happens.
But when you opened up the conversation this afternoon, you kind of put it in perspective. You said, you were driving home and all of a sudden it was that accumulated stress, right? And that's what I was experiencing. Things were building, things were building, things were building, things were building, things were building. And suddenly you had that target of opportunity. You know what I mean? Because you're not going to kick your kid. You're not going to kick your wife. You're not, you know what I mean? You're not going to, you know what I mean? And so those guys, dealing with stuff at work, there's different levels of intensity depending on where your priorities are, right? And I think for most of us in the fire service, number one is faith. Number two is family. The fire service comes a distant third. You know what I mean? And so we'll take a lot of our emotional baggage to work with us. You know what I mean? And that's okay. That's okay. Part of, I think, what's so great about the fire service is probably like with that captain. I'll bet you at some point in time that kid will come up to him down the road and say, I don't know if you remember this, but one day you jumped on me and then you came to me and said, hey, you were sorry. And later in life, I did this or I did that because of the fact that I realized that even a guy as great as you and as cool as you, was self-aware enough to come and tell somebody like me so far down the food chain that he was sorry.
When you do the right thing, you set a great example for people that they can actually look back on and do just that. So you're right.
100%. And it's when you do it, right? Not when you talk about it, when you do it, and doing it's a lot harder than talking about it, but it's fun. Every time I've had to eat crow, and that's the expression for when you're apologizing for being a knucklehead. Every time I've had to eat crow, it's worked out so well for me because the people have always said, hey, stop. You know what I mean? I get it. I've done it too. You know what I mean?
We all make mistakes. Listen, Bob, I mean, I like to be known as a pretty positive guy that's always trying to help people improve and get better. However, this is the mug my wife bought me for Christmas, right? And what you're talking about, first family first. I agree with that. Here's an interesting thing, okay? And
I'll never forget that mug.
No, you'll never forget my mug.
No,
now, here's the other side. It's all the parts of Grumpy, and
that's hysterical.
Yeah. So, and it's huge. I say, I just want a big mug for Christmas. I don't drink coffee, but I like my water, right? So, so I'm having a bad time listen, we all have great administrations we work for. We have challenging ones. I'm at one point working for a challenging administration. I'm dealing with a lot of stress. It's that time when I ended up saying I need to go get checked out. Some of the things that happen at work can cause that problem. And I was dealing with some challenges at work. And so one day my wife says to me, she says, don't take this the wrong way, but you become a jerk every day, the day before your shift. than any other day. And I know why. She says, I know you're dealing with stuff that you're unhappy with, but why do you have to take it out on us, the people who love you? And that was exactly what I needed to hear. Because I realized that I was taking, like you say, we're taking our problems with home into the firehouse. Well, I was taking my problems in the firehouse home. And from that point forward, man, and I still make mistakes every day, but from that point forward, I remember telling myself, look, when I walk into my house after my shift, or when I walk into the firehouse to start my shift, smile. Put a smile on your face. No matter what I'm dealing with, I'm here, first of all, if the chief has a bad day, who else has a bad day?
Oh yeah. It's called down lead.
Yeah.
If you've ever seen a dog handler, if it's an old dog handler, they get out of the car, they ask the other guy, what do you got? We got a guy inside. The guy gets the dog gets out, woof. They go walk and get the bad guy. Young dog handler, excited dog handler, what do you got? What do you got? Oh, yeah. Hang on, I'll get the dog. That dog will bite your ass. So everything's down lead. But your wife pointed out a really insightful thing, which is fascinating, which is we've all married up. I'm convinced that I don't care if it's your husband or your wife. Every firefighter I know has married up. And that's the secret of their success, is that they've found someone who they flat out never in a million years ever deserved. And yet they married them. So there's a great amount of data study that the most stressful time for folks is going to work, not at work. It's going to work. And you just said it was the day before.
The day before.
It was thinking about dealing with these people and dealing with whatever. It wasn't dealing with it. It was running your head through it. And I once wrote an editorial called See Me in the Morning. And so you get that call at 5:00 and it's the chief that says, hey, Viscuso, see me in my office tomorrow morning. Click. And you're like, what does he want?
Yeah, and then you have to worry, well, like, what is this all about? What did I do wrong?
Mitch, it's about that fire on West Street. You call the union guy. I'm not taking the rap for this. I don't care what. I want you to be at that office with me at 9:00 tomorrow morning. And you and the union guy show up. The union guy's sitting outside. You go walking in ready to give him hell. She says, hey, I got a family pass to the game tonight at the stadium. You want to go?
Right.
And you're trying to tell the union guy, go back.
Yeah, exactly. Hide, cover. Yeah. Yep. No, you're right. And but see, and that's the importance of being a more transparent leader. First of all, if somebody does something wrong, if their behavior needs to be corrected, absolutely correct it. But have you ever worked in an organization where you have people that are in leadership positions where you can do 10 things right, one thing wrong. The only thing you ever hear is about the one you did wrong, and not the 10 you did right. Listen, this is what the point I've been trying to make for the past 10 years as one of my main points is this. Yes, address the thing they do wrong, but tell them about the 10 they did right also. Simple. Because people need positive reinforcement too. They need to know that they're doing some things right. It's like this equation I put on the board of 10 plus 1 equals 11, 10 plus 2 equals 12, 10 plus 3 equals 13, 10 plus 4 equals 13, 10 plus 5 equals 15. And I say, so what's wrong here? And everybody sees it. Well, 10 plus 4 does not equal 13. It's 14. That's right. What you all saw was the one that's wrong. But how many of you seen the 4 that are right? So the point is, yeah, we need to understand when things are wrong and need to be corrected and fix it and discipline when it needs to be. But at the same time, many people, when they're doing things wrong, many times they're unaware of what they're supposed to be doing right because they weren't taught the right way, or it wasn't, stressed enough, or maybe they're just unable to do it the right way because they need to train more and prepare more or be taught differently, whatever it may be. We can't be so quick to say, you're doing it wrong, sit in the corner, shut up, and be done with it, when we should be taking them under our wing, because the person that we're dealing with may be the exact person in our industry that may be pulling you out of a building within an hour from now. So how are you treating them?
That's a great point. So I want to flip the conversation a little on you, because I think that oftentimes when we talk about leadership in particular, and that's what you're known for, is that people always assume that you're leading downward. In other words, you're sending messages downward. But I think in the American Fire Service and in most organizations, the toughest part about leadership is managing up, right?
Yeah.
Like, how do we help our superiors to, message, behave, frame things in a way that are supportive to us and the folks that stream off of us, right? The
Yeah.
people side to side, I always like to look at the gun sight, above, below, side to side. And I think that in my career, what I found to be some of the most successful men and women I've worked with had a very unique ability of managing up, right? Communicating well up and helping their superiors who may not have been as elegant in some areas. And Will Rogers said it best: we're all ignorant, just different subjects. We all have skill sets, just in different dimensions.
Or Albert Einstein, everybody's a genius, but if you judge a fish on its ability to climb a tree, it'll live its whole life believing that it's stupid.
There you go.
Everybody. I like what you're asking. It's because leading up the chain of command is much more difficult, but I think that it starts with courageous communication, being able to have the hard conversations that are necessary to lead during difficult times. But I got to tell you something about this, because a lot of it depends on the person who is above you, because some people, maybe they make their decisions off fear or greed or ego and don't want to accept any advice or, I guess, ownership of a mistake that they may be making when someone who is beneath them in their eyes, in their mind, and this is a flaw, but in their mind, these people are beneath them. What can they possibly know that I don't know? When I think everybody needs to realize that you're surrounded. We in this fire industry are surrounded by talented people, right? So you may be great at certain things, but everybody that you're surrounded with is great at things as well. And maybe some of them are better at certain things than you are. So humble yourself to realize that you might not have the best ideas all the time. Be open to hear some of these suggestions. But one time I'm out doing a 3-day training session with a department out in Texas, and it's 3 days of officer development training, and I have lunch one day with the chief of the department. Shortly after that, I get invited to come out to the Texas Fire Chiefs Association and be a keynote speaker at their Fire Chiefs Conference. He asked the committee if he could be the one to come introduce to me. And so he tells me this beforehand, just before I get introduced. He says, "I hope you don't mind, but I asked if I could introduce you." I said, "Oh, no, I'd be honored." He goes, "Well, I asked, but I don't know if you're going to like what I'm going to say." What? So talk about getting called to the chief's office and not knowing why. I said, "I don't know where." Now, this is moments before he goes on stage. So he goes on stage and he says, "So I asked if I could be the one to introduce Chief Viscuso, and there's a reason for that." He goes, "Because I brought him in to speak with my organization, and we had lunch one day, and at the start of our conversation, I realized that I didn't like him." He goes, "But I didn't like him because I didn't like what he said to me, because it hurt. But it's what I needed to hear." He said, "I was telling him that the guy before me, the chief before me, the one thing he told me when I got promoted was, don't get close to your firefighters." And so I've been invited, and this is the story him and I were having at lunch conversation, but now he's telling everybody. I've been invited to weddings. I've been invited to christenings, to family events that were important to them. And I chose not to go because I just didn't want to develop a relationship with any of them, because how am I going to discipline them if I have a relationship with them? And when we were having this conversation at lunch, I said to him, "You know what? Do you respect the Navy SEALs?" He says, "Yeah, who doesn't? I mean, here I am in Texas. It seems like every Navy SEAL comes from Texas." He goes, "Yeah, I do." I said, "Okay." I said, "Well, let me ask you this. Do you think the commander of the Navy SEALs would attend the wedding of one of the other SEALs that invites him?" He says, "I never thought of it that way." I said, so why wouldn't you? I mean, this is an important moment in a firefighter's life, and they think enough of you to invite you there. But you say, I don't want to go because I might somewhere down the line have to discipline him and put something in his file. And I just want to be prepared for that.
Wow. You
Right.
know, there's a great book on the shelf behind me here that I reference a great deal, and it's called Customs and Courtesies for the United States Navy, and thick book. And it basically covers everything from how to ask someone to dance, how to set the table, how to lay out a uniform, for a superior officer. But there's a part in there that actually talks about exactly what you're talking about. In other words, what is the acceptable relationship between a superior officer and a subordinate officer? And there's a way to manage that fulfills both the need for connection and showing concern and respect, and still maintaining that distance as a commanding officer. And that book, I'll have to dig out the chapter, but that book did more for me. I read it, God, 35, 40 years ago, but I go back to it from time to time because it's a really important lesson. And in the Chief's defense, we don't do a good job in the American Fire Service of teaching those types of things, right? Of explaining that, right? And if you want to go to, say, the wedding, you arrive, carry yourself well, have a few dances, and leave a tad early.
Exactly.
Always leave a tad early.
Yep.
Before the troops have a chance to, really, so that they can, let it go a little bit with the old man out of the room. You know what I mean? And if you drink, don't drink there.
Right.
I don't drink myself, but any longer. But I mean, if you drink, moderate your drinking. Don't drink like you would with your peers. Have a drink, be polite or whatever if you're a drinker. But it goes through all that, right? How to maintain so that you never put yourself in a position where you've compromised yourself in terms of that relationship.
Right.
But it doesn't mean you can't, mingle and show empathy and learn about these people. Because one of my favorite sayings about leadership is there's three parts to it. You have to know what's expected of your people and what they're going through. And part of what they're going through has nothing to do with the job. It may have to do with their family situation, may have to do with their personal situation,
Right.
may have to do with their health, their mental health. And the third part of that is you have to know what's expected and what they're going through, or you don't know what you're doing. The second part is that you have to know your job and thoroughly. And the last part is you've got to be a good dude. You know what I mean? And my son told me after he gave me those three lessons, he said, if I explain that one to you, Dad, I can't help you. But he's a commander of the United States Navy. And so I often turn to him when I have questions about exactly what you're talking about. And so in his system, when you talk about managing up or leading up, the master chiefs and the chief officers, if you're a young ensign or a young, lieutenant in the United States Navy and you show up at your first command, if the first thing you do is find out whatever your master chief drinks and buy him a case, you're an idiot. Because your career is made on the backs of those, your future is predicated on how well those people can take care of you, because they know everything there is to know about the United States Navy. You don't. You know what I mean? And so the system there is a little bit different. In the fire service, we're more like the Marine Corps. Everyone's a rifleman first. So, and the Marine Corps obviously has an officer cadre, but they do a really in-depth job of making sure that they know how a Marine's life is like on a daily basis as well. So, but I think the fire service does a good job. And you and I both cleaned a lot of toilets. We've cleaned a lot of cabinets. We've stood for a lot of inspections. We pumped a lot of pumps. We raised a lot of sticks before we ever got to sit in that right seat, you know what I mean, and answer the radio, you know what I mean? And I think that helps. I think in terms of leadership with the fire service, one of the things I often say is I'm not a fan of folks skipping rank. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think it's important to I think it's important because then you know what they're going through. You know, I mean, if you've never been a pump operator and you're trying to run a fire and you don't understand how difficult it is when you've got, 3 or 4 lines off and somebody turns to you and says, "Hey, can you set up the pipe?" No, unless you know a way to put more water in that 5-inch hose,
It's the same reason why most franchises want you to work for the franchise before you actually go out and own one. So
I didn't know that. Okay.
A lot of, yeah. I mean, we have, so I just did some work with Jersey Mike's and went in and did some training for their general managers. And the guys that brought me in, I think now they own 19 franchises, but most of their general managers are actually people that want to own franchises, but they have to work there first. And so they're working there kind of, cutting their teeth, learning how it all works. So before they go out and own one, they can have that experience. But what's great about these guys that own these particular franchises is that they're really focused on developing these people, even though essentially they're going to become their competition. They're going to go out, start another franchise, and maybe take some business away from them. I think why they're so successful, and last year they were the franchisees of the year, if I said that correctly, but they're successful because they focus on personal growth. And I really appreciate them for that.
Wow. Did they provide educational opportunities and things? Obviously, they brought you in.
They brought me in, and they have this guy. Actually, they gave me this awesome little backpack that I bring regularly. I got fire books in here right now. I think I got something by Avillo, Turpak, Castro.
Don't leave that laying around, or Jersey Mike Nasta will pick it up because his name's on it.
Yeah. There you go. You're right. So I didn't even think about that. I got to keep that away from them. Yeah. But they do. They once a year, these guys do some training where they'll bring in some speakers, and I went in and talked a little bit about customer service. But they also do some team building exercises, and they're really they give books for them to read, and I really appreciate that their mindset, personal growth. I remember one Christmas, I bought books for all my officers. And I tried to take a book that I felt would mean something to them. One, for example, I gave them "It's Your Ship."
Sure.
Great book. I thought this was a great. I did give one "How to Win Friends and Influence People" because he struggled a little bit with that. And then and here another one that I gave a tactical book to. So it's all kind of dependent on what I kind of felt they need, but. I think it's a great gift to give, a gift of education, especially when it's personal. And it's also great to give, some kind of a tool that they can use.
Or a subscription to a good magazine.
Or subscription to a good magazine. We've done that as well, too. In fact, I think I got
shameless plug.
Around here.
Shameless plug.
Well, shameless plug right here.
Yeah, right.
But people don't realize that I actually do keep my books on my shelf regularly because I reference them often what did I say about that again?
You can see that one of my bookshelves behind me there. And my problem is I can't let them go. Yeah. I mean, even the books I hate, but I mean, oftentimes I'll read a book. I read one by a gal, I think it was called Persistence or something like that. And she probably could have gotten away with a page. Mm-hmm. But I read the whole thing, and I found a few nuggets in it. I found a couple of things. I was like, okay, and it reminded me because that irrespective of how you feel about it, like the guy who said I didn't like him because he was telling me things I didn't want to hear. Every book, every article, every person you meet knows something you don't, or sees something in a way that might light a spark in you. You know what I mean? And
if you could take one thing away from everything you read and every conversation you have, I'm at Massachusetts Fire Chiefs Conference. A guy approaches me during a break. He comes up to me and says, I need to talk to you. And he's got this really negative energy, right? And I'm thinking he's going to criticize something that I said in my class, which, happens when you speak a lot. And I'm thinking, where's this going to go? And he starts talking about a problem he's having with guys at work. My union president doesn't show me any respect. I can't stand them. These guys are doing this. They go to the town administrator. They go behind my back and blah, 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 blah. And I'm looking at the clock thinking, I got to get back in and start class again in a couple minutes. I said, how about this? Stay after class. And when I'm done, we'll go grab a cup of coffee. We'll talk about this. And he just goes, oh, just kind of leaves. And now I'm paying attention to him. I see him in class, and he's got this thing going on. And he's just got other stuff on his mind. So after class, shake a few hands. I look for him. He's gone. He's just nowhere. So I can't find him. And that was it. Well, maybe it's about a month later. My phone rings. I'm in the office, and he says, Chief Viscuso? I said, yeah. And he tells me his name. He says, you probably don't remember me. I said, Massachusetts Fire Chiefs Conference. He goes, you remember me? I said, I do. I'm thinking, how could I forget? The negative energy is even coming over the phone. And it wasn't negative, but I remember his voice. He says, I just want to tell you something that happened. He says, after I left your class, I was talking to a friend, and this was, a couple days later, 3, 4, 5 days later. He says, I'm talking to a friend, another chief, explaining to him some of the situations I'm dealing with at work. And it's all the same stuff I just told you, Chief. And he says this to me. He goes, you know what, Chief, you're not going to want to hear what I have to say, but I'm just going to say it anyway. You're the problem. And he says, I turned to him and I said, I'm the problem. How am I the problem? They're the ones that are doing this and this and this. He goes, yeah, but you don't show them any respect. And if you don't show them any respect, how could you expect to ever get any return? Whoa. He goes, so I went and I lied in bed that night, and I thought about the one sentence that I wrote from your class, which was, you can't fix a problem if you refuse to acknowledge that it exists. He goes, and I realized maybe I am the problem. He goes, and this wasn't easy, but I called them up the next day and I asked to have a meeting, and we met, and I started by saying, I just want to tell you I'm sorry. I don't feel I've been treating you with respect. It's not the relationship I wanted. I don't know how we ended up here, but I want to apologize. I want to see what we can do to fix this and try to move forward. He goes, one of the things they said to me was, Chief, we know we're not always going to get what we want, but we just want to be heard and understood. And maybe we could find a way that makes us, all happy. He says, from that point forward, our relationship has never been better. He goes, and it's not perfect. He goes, but it's better. He goes, and I just wanted to call you and tell you. And he says, and if you ever want to use that story, you can. I still don't use his name, but I do tell the story.
You raise a great point about when you're out there, and many of the folks listening to us are going to get out there at some point in your career. You're going to be asked to speak somewhere, and you're going to have experiences like Frank did, where the guy tells you he's going to introduce you. You may not like the introduction, or the guy walks up to you and disappears. And one of my favorite experiences, well, it wasn't my favorite, one of my most precious memories of speaking, I was in Phoenix, and I'd just given a talk, and or maybe I was somewhere. Anyway, maybe it was Phoenix. I was somewhere, and I'm getting, there's always food after, and I'm getting my food, and a young man is in line ahead of me, and he turns and goes, oh, hi, Chief. I said, oh, how are you doing? He goes, yeah, good to see you. He goes, I said, well, thank you. He goes, yeah, I saw you before. I saw you in Connecticut. I said, oh, well, great. Well, appreciate that. He goes, yeah, you were much better there.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, how do you not have a filter to know you probably shouldn't say that to a speaker?
Just kind of say, oh, yeah, thank you. You just don't know what to say, right? You just kind of shrug it off and go, oh, well, thanks. It's great. Oh God, or you probably had this too, you do a keynote somewhere, and and everybody's keynotes, you're William Wallace, you're shooting fireballs out your arse, you know what I mean? It's dramatic, right? And then they ask you to come do a class, and a class is like this, it's a class, right? You're having a conversation with people, and you're explaining concepts, and you're talking about applicability, and trying to find what resonates and doesn't with people, and people will come up to you and say, wow, you're really different, in person. I'm like, okay. It's like, yeah, it's really fun. It's really fun to be able to do both, right? To be able to perform, and a good keynote is a performance, and then a class is a class.
Yeah.
It's an intellectual experience, and I enjoy them both immensely. I mean, and I think I'm so grateful every day that I'm allowed to continue to do classes, and allowed to continue to do talks. And
you have such a incredibly high level of passion that it's so easy to get, because it's contagious. It's easy to get really caught up in that moment and feel And that's what I think doing a great keynote is all about, making someone feel an emotion, right? I've often said this. I want to make, in my class, I want to make people laugh, I want to make them cry, and I want to make them commit. Why? Because I want to reawake that emotion, because that's how we're going to get them to reignite that spark, that energy, that passion. You have that, and it's amazing. So I don't know anybody that's ever sat in a Bobby Halton keynote and said, when is this thing over? This is boring. No, man, you're on the edge of your seat thinking this is fantastic. So, and I have a different style than you,
Yeah.
but for sure.
I love your style, because I get wrapped up in your narrative. Your use of words is amazing, and your pace and your tonality is unparalleled when you're on stage. I mean, you're really something else to watch. If you have never seen Frank do a keynote, come to FDIC next April and hold on, because it's an experience. But you nailed something. There's two phrases that have always stuck with me about speeches. One is from Paul Simon, and Paul Simon once said in one of his songs, "A man hears what he wants to hear and disregards the rest." So oftentimes we'll give talks, and folks will come up to us and say, "I really like the way you gave it to the IAFF in that talk." And then the next guy comes up to you in the line and says, "I really like the way you backed up the IAF in that talk." And I'm just using the IAFF as
yeah.
But our filters are such that we tend, especially if we connect with the person speaking, right? And the other part that I always remind myself when I'm giving talks is that folks might not remember what you said, but they'll remember how they felt about it.
Yes.
And
well, that's why it's so important to use stories, right?
Right. Well, and that's why that chief probably said, "I didn't like you," right? Because of how he felt about himself, how he felt about the.
Right. It had nothing to do with actually me. It had to do how I made him feel. And by the way, we are great friends, and we were that day, and we still are.
No, and he didn't mean, yeah, and he nailed it by telling you, it had him not liking you had nothing to do with you.
Right.
It had everything to do with him, and which is pretty insightful on his part when you think about it, really. So getting out there in the leadership world and in the public sphere, it's interesting, right? And I think now more than ever before, we're in a very interesting time. And folks always say, "Oh, it's so novel and it's never been like this." Well, no, it's just the technology part of it.
That's right.
Has made it different. But you have to remember that the newspaper changed everything. And if you remember that back in the early days, there were people who made their livings. Thomas Paine was one of them, who made a living by writing limericks for politicians. "Old Frank is quick. That's why you want big Frank Viscuso." This, he would write limericks for people. That was his job, and that's how people got their name out there. That would be the modern day commercial. And the vitriolic stuff between politicians was always there. Jefferson's people accused Adams' people of being, rapists and murderers, and vice versa, and both of them were totally morally depraved. And those two men said horrible things about one another. They each had their own newspapers. It was like Fox and MSNBC. One was for this guy, one was for that guy. They were a little more transparent back then, but still, nonetheless, very, very much parallel today. And all of that notwithstanding, they died best friends on the same day, on July 4th.
Well, yeah, and not just that, everything they've been through that led up to that, you're wondering how there's still conflict there. There's still, a challenge with them, but yet these guys they've shaped America.
Look at George Bush and Bill Clinton.
Yeah.
And it doesn't tell you all you need to know. You know what I mean? You can disagree completely with someone and still respect them. And that's, the real people of worth and value in the world get that. You know what I mean? And it doesn't mean they still won't tear one another apart. They will. But, and you're seeing it today with Mr. Trump and Mr. Cuomo. They disagree all the time. They're throwing stones at each other. He should stop Twitter and he should go do his job. But they met in the White House. They talked with each other. They respect one another. They might disagree on everything, But those two guys are shown as a pretty good example of how you can be polar opposites politically, be, jihadists, or lack of a better word, for your followers. You could be the Washingtonian, you could be, or the Jeffersonian, you could be the Addisonian, and nonetheless still be good people. And I think that was a neat example of leadership that came out of this crisis, was Mr. Newsom lavishing praise on Mr. Trump, and Mr. Trump lavishing praise on Mr. Cuomo and Mr. Newsom and others. We really had a glimpse there of, take all the parasitical folks out of the equation, and when the real principles, in other words, the people themselves, communicate, you see the real people, and you see the real, they all have maybe different methods, maybe different thoughts, but they all are trying to achieve some type of common good, and maintain our union and our way of life. And they can disagree vehemently, but I think all three of those men that I just mentioned all showed tremendous character in the last few weeks. And I think the American people should take tremendous pride in that many of these people, they didn't drop it completely, but they dropped 99% of the politics to try to get.
We need more of that. We need more, especially now. We need more of it, where people put that, those agendas aside and say, we all have one common goal here. Think about firefighters who are going into a building. They're not discussing politics. They're not discussing religion. They're in there to get a job done.
Sure.
And right now, that's what our politicians need to do: get the job done. Get the job done. We're in a pandemic.
Well, and what I love about firefighters is that, you could be in a house with a guy who you just can't stand, and he can't stand you. We've all had that experience where you may have had a rub over something at some point, right? But if anybody outside the house talks about him, I will kick your ass.
That's right.
He's my, butt. You know what I mean? You don't get to talk bad. It's like family, right?
It's family.
Yeah.
That's the way it needs to be.
That's the way it needs to be.
That's what it needs to be. If you have a problem with one of my brothers or sisters, you have a problem with me. It needs to be that, not to where it gets physical, but to where we take care of each other that way.
Doesn't mean I can't have a problem with you.
That's right.
That's between me and you. You know what I mean?
Well, and now listen, and I'm from Hudson County, New Jersey. Okay, although I live down in Ocean County, New Jersey now, but in Hudson County, New Jersey, here's the challenge, or not the challenge, here's how it is. And Avila will tell you this, Turpak will tell you this, everybody up there will tell you this, NASTA will tell you this. If you have a problem with me or I have a problem with you, I pick up the phone, I call you, or we go outside, we talk about it, we air our differences, then we're done with it, and we go get a beer. It's over, right? We don't carry it, we don't hold the grudge, at least the majority of the people don't. It's like, put it on the table, get it over. But now that's the whole thing about New Jersey that sometimes gets misunderstood too, is because sometimes we're very direct, right to the point. And, I believe in the whole, sandwich technique when you're criticizing somebody, begin and end on a positive. I believe in that. But most of New Jersey is just like, let me just tell you what the problem I have with you, and they'll be done with it. And some can take it, some can't. But at the end of the day, it only happens when you have that strong relationship with the people where you can have a conversation with them like that, because it's not personal. It's just the way we kind of communicate, and everybody's different. And Bayonne, New Jersey is even different than anywhere else in New Jersey, because I don't even understand the language there. I'm friends with a lot of those guys in Bayonne, but I'm like, where did that accent come from? Because it's nowhere else in the county.
Well, that's why New Jersey guys like pizza, because there's nothing on top of it. It's just the cheese and then the crust,
We love our pizza,
Pizza. Well, I'll tell you,
I got to tell you, I grew up eating Pizza Land pizza. You ever see the opening of The Sopranos? They passed this place, Pizza Land. And I don't know if you've ever watched The Sopranos, but there's a place where they hang out with one of their headquarters, so to speak, is Satriel's Pork Store. That's 2 buildings away from my fire station. So they were always out there filming. And what a great time that was when James Gandolfini and the cast of The Sopranos is just kind of hanging out during long days of shooting, and sometimes taking some pictures and talking to the guys. And it was a fun time.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I've seen quite a few of the episodes. I thought it was a great show, and he seemed like a really great guy too. And all of my Jersey buddies, whether it's you or Murphy or whatever, they'll say, yeah, I was going down the turnpike, the part where the Sopranos opening, and I was right there, or the Bada Boom Club, the real name, like Satin Dolls or something.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, that's right.
So they always point that
Not
out.
that I've ever been there.
No, no, no. I heard about it. So, but my family owned Halton's Hardware in Cliffside Park. That was
Really?
that's my uncle's hardware store. Yeah, my uncle Ed and my uncle Matt owned it together. My dad would help out. We'd go there on the weekends and hang out. My cousin Maddie and I. My cousin Maddie still owns Jet Wash out there in Cliffside Park.
How
So,
about that? Wow.
listen, little Jersey connection. We'd come across the bridge. We'd go slumming. I'm just kidding.
Yeah, I hear you.
We left the high end Bronx. So,
Yes,
hey, we went a little over. I apologize. I just I could talk to you for days and days and days, and it's just awesome to be with you again for especially 2 days in a row. What a treat! And I'm glad things are going well in your world, and looking forward to April. And we're gonna have a big announcement coming soon. We'll be able to talk to people about it, and Frank will be a big part of that too. So keep tuned. And Frank, any closing thoughts before we wrap it up?
Listen, just thank you. Thank you for all you do. And for everybody that's out there that's listening to this, I appreciate every one of you. I mean, we're in a society that, and I like to say this as a father of 3 boys, we're in a society that I think is hurting for role models. And the one thing that I love about just going to FDIC is when you look out at that sea of people during the opening ceremonies, or any class, or walking through the hallways, or any event that's happening, you're looking at the greatest role models in the country. And the thing is, many people, maybe we fail to realize that, or recognize that, or to acknowledge that. And I think we need to start looking at that again and saying, you know what, we stand for what's right. And we have to continue to stand for what's right, because I don't want to be this generation that kind of goes backwards instead of forward, by continuing to set the standard that society needs. So as a father of 3 boys, I want to thank everybody that's listening to this for what they do. I have a friend now. He's actually running for a Congress seat in Florida, right? And he actually just called me last night. He says, I just want to tell you something. He goes, have you ever watched Chicago Fire? I said, I've watched an episode or 2. He goes, how real is it? And I tell him a little bit about Steve, and I said, well, he's a technical advisor there. So I said, I'm sure a lot of it's real. I'm going to be honest with you, Bobby. I really haven't watched many episodes of it, but I said, I'm sure it's kind of real. He goes, well, my wife and I have a new appreciation for firefighters. He says, I've known you now for 15 years. I said, about that. He goes, but I never really understood what you did until I actually watched that. He says, so I really appreciate you and the sacrifice that you've made. And that's how I feel about firefighters. It's not what they do every day, but it's what they're willing to do at every given moment. So thank you.
And Steve does a wonderful job. Steve Chikarotis is who we're talking about. He's our buddy. He's a producer. He's one of the executive producers of that show. And Chicago battalion chief, retired, great career, did 35 years on the line. Real deal. I mean, him and Bobby Hoff and Ray Orozco, they were all on different companies together, and they had, great cadre of guys. And Steve actually let me write a throwaway line for Herman one time, and he didn't use it. He kind of modified it, but at least I got to mess around with it and hang out on the set with Steve. And I've met some of those actors, and they really work at trying to portray us in the best light possible, and they do a wonderful job of it.
Awesome.
I'm very proud of that show. And yeah, Steve always points out to me, I'll call him up and say, Steve, go, Hollywood, Halton, calm down. Like if you ever look at the face pieces go from here to here.
You got to see the actor though, right?
And they call them the zebra, not zebra, what do they call them? Maybe it is the horse mask or something, but they were special made for them by the Sky Corporation so that you could see their whole faces for the television cameras. So, but when you see them, you're like, what the hell kind of face piece is this? Yeah. And Chikarotis looks at me like, Halton, you moron. Yeah. So
I'm just glad that they have him on there to make sure that they're telling the stories authentically. I think that's great.
Steve does a wonderful job in almost every one of those rescues that you see. Many of the storylines are right they're out of reality. They're either Steve lived through them, or a friend of ours lived through them, or someone sent the story to Steve and Steve dissected it and got it down. And those actors take great pains to respect the memory of some of the people they portray, and the dignity of the
I've heard that.
They really.
I think, I need to send him a copy of Common Valor. Maybe he can honor some of those guys with
When
some.
I get the Courage and Valor nominations, I send them to Steve because there's so many great stories in there, and those actors, they go down to the Chicago Fire Academy and they go through the training. And if there's a rappelling deal, they get trained. You got Chicago firefighters are on that scene, and those actors, they do a lot of those stunts. Obviously, the troops stand in for them sometimes, because it's too risky. But those men and women that do that show bust their butts to make sure that they're doing it right. I'm very I take great umbrage when people disparage that show, because I think that of all the shows that have ever been done about the fire service, that one is without equal in terms of how it's portrayed us and how much good it's done for the fire service. So thank you to Steve, who will be accompanying you on this stage as our other keynoter. So we'll have Frank and Steve at FDIC. And now I get to say that for 2 years. So it's kind of it's a first for me too. And
So he's also a two-time keynoter.
Yeah,
back to back.
Yeah, and as the father of 3 boys also, who are actually all grown men now, I'll tell you the one thing that has always stuck with me as a dad, and I know it's the same with you, is that I hope to strive every day to be the man that these men deserve to have as a father. You know what I mean? And I hope that when I've run my race, that they can at least say their dad was a good man. You know what I mean? And that from your sons, that's the best compliment, and from your fellow firefighters, if they say you were a good firefighter, that's the best damn eulogy a man will ever get.
No doubt.
All the rest of it is, great, but when they say I was a good firefighter and your kids say you were a good man, that's it, man. That's the goal. So
yeah,
Frank, thank you so much for this conversation, and I know we'll have many, many more. I know there's on the National Fireman's Journal, I'll be bringing many people back, because I don't think you can get enough Viscuso. At least I don't feel like I can. So, and I think the audience feels the same way. So,
my wife may disagree a little bit, but.
So you remember we were kids, Waldorf and Statler? They were the 2 Muppets. They're up in the balcony. The 2.
Yeah.
That's it. Waldorf and Statler. So yeah, right. Hey, listen, awesome. Thank you so much. Hey, listen, if you like the National Fireman's Journal podcast, please subscribe. We'd really appreciate it. Let us know who you'd like us to talk to, or if you're interested in being interviewed, give us a shout. And thank you very much for listening to myself and Frank. And please take a look at FDIC and fire engineering, and we'll see you all down the road.